Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We are about to start. If you want to leave in the chat, where are you from where are you watching us? We are happy to have you all here. We are going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes. In the meantime, please feel free to write down from where are you watching us. And we are happy to have you all with us today. As I said, we have Dan Deppen with us today talking about the power of node partials. So we are super happy and thrilled for this webinar. And he's having some technical issues with his microphone. So we hope that it gets solved as soon as possible. So in the meantime, if you want to answer the poll that should appear on your screen, that would help us a lot, so we get to know you better. And we know if you are already a Real Estate IQ subscriber and if you would like to have a one-on-one consultation. Okay, so thank you, Jonathan and Derek, for sharing. So we have people from White Settlement and Indianapolis. So we are happy to have you here. So we are Real Estate IQ. Your deal is our mission, and we are deal maker and dream maker, and we provide the best real estate solutions committed to help one more person to win. So make your deals come true. This is the streamline your deal making process. So these are the solutions that we provide from Real Estate IQ. We offer off-market leads, EVA, CMA, custom leads mining, and virtual assistants. So if you're looking for more, please try our exclusive membership. These are our social media accounts where you can follow us as well. We are in Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and you can use the QR codes that appear below of each icon, so you can join us in our community. And you can also follow us and join us in our newsletter by scanning the QR code that appears on the right side of the screen, so you don't miss any of our weekly webinars and in-person events. We have a lot every week, and we will be thrilled to count with your participation. We also offer you a free 30-minute in-depth consultation of Real Estate IQ services with one of our experts. So feel free to schedule it now by scanning the QR code that appears on the screen, also by answering the poll or reaching bracelet@realestateIQ.co. This is a very short video of what we do. I guess the audio is not working. Sorry, the sound from the video. I don't know why. But in any case, are the slides, what is important, and the information on the video. We are super excited to follow with Dan and his presentation about the power of node partials. So thank you again, everyone, for attending, and feel free to write down your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, so Dan is able to answer them as soon as possible. Dan, let's try and see if it works.
Okay, thanks. Are you able to hear me?
I'm not able to hear you, but let's see if the audience
is
if
anyone
able.
else could just type in the chat if they can hear me.
Is anyone else able to hear Dan? Okay, perfect. So it was my
Oh,
issue,
perfect.
I
Okay,
guess.
great.
I'm sorry for that, but I'm happy that everyone is able to hear you. So Dan, I hope you have the best presentation ever. So thank you again, everyone,
All
for
right.
attending.
Thank you. And on my screen, I got the slides up on the side, so I'll be kind of looking sideways a little bit. But anyways, thanks everyone for joining. So my name is Dan Deppen, and today I'm going to be talking about partials. So just before we get started, a little bit about me. I'm an active note investor. I started note investing about 7 years ago. So far, I've got a decent sized portfolio. I do a mix of performing and non-performing notes, all first position. So I came into this from a non-real estate background. So I started my career as an engineer in the aerospace industry, and then went to business school, then went into product management, which I'm still active with. But then along the way, did we lose audio? Hopefully not. Along the way, found my way into real estate and specifically note investing. And what I'm going to talk about today is something called partials. And if you're not familiar with that, I'll tell you all about it and kind of why I feel they're so powerful. In the last couple months or so, I've been really deep diving into these. I actually started doing them a couple years ago. But the more I've kind of peeled the onion on these, the more excited I am about some of the potential opportunities. So I'll talk about what partials are, first of all, some of the advantages for you as the partial seller, and then I'll also talk about why it's advantageous for people to buy partials from you, how to structure these deals, how to get them set up, the actual mechanics of how to put them together, and then what to do if the borrower stops paying. That's like the biggest question of all, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and I will have my contact info and everything at the end. So what is a partial? So at a high level, a partial is just simply when you buy a note, so you're buying a mortgage, which is basically a stream of payments of future cash flows. And then you're going to sell another investor a portion of those future payments. If that's confusing, I'll use some visuals to try to explain it. So here's an example. This is based on a deal I did recently. I did actually fudge a few of the numbers in this just to get them to work out into like nice round numbers, so it makes for a little better example. But let's say we buy this mortgage note, okay? And this is on a real 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Houston, Texas. It has a loan balance of a little over $127,000. We're buying this loan for $99,500. So, you know, most notes when they trade at some discount. And then that gets you a monthly payment of $1,250. And in this case, there are 195 payments remaining. So the first step in creating this partial is I go out and I buy this note on these terms. Now, if I want to, I can just hold this note for the next 195 months, but I'm going to show something we can do to get a little bit creative and actually get our money pulled back out of this. So this is what this deal looks like if I'm just buying the note, just not getting into the partial part yet. So I bought this thing for $99,500. And then typically you've got some due diligence expenses, right? You might be pulling a BPO, you should be pulling an O&E report, you might be paying an attorney to review the chain of title. There could be fees to transfer servicing of the loan, things like that, right? So let's call it, for nice round numbers, $100,000 that we're paying this loan for. So once I pay the loan, I start getting payments of $1,250 every month. But assuming I'm not self-servicing, I'm hiring a loan servicer. I tend to use FCI for most of mine, and for performing notes, when I have escrows set up, it's about $35 a month service fee. So my actual net is $1,215. So if I buy this loan under these terms, I hold it for 195 months, and the borrower pays that whole time, I end up with a 12.68% return. And that's factoring in my expenses. So that's a pretty sweet deal, right? That's a solid double-digit return. This would be a really nice deal to do in like a self-directed IRA, because the other thing I didn't really call out too much before is this property has a Zillow value of $213,000, right? So this borrower has a lot of equity in this deal. One of the good things about the current environment is if you're buying a loan that was originated in the last few years, the property value is probably a decent bit higher than when the loan was originated. In this case, it's a lot higher. So the borrower has a lot of equity, which is good for you for two reasons. One, the borrower has a big incentive not to let this go in foreclosure, right? They have a lot of skin in the game. And if the borrower for some reason got super sideways and absolutely could not make payments, then it would be in their best interest just to sell the property and move on rather than let you take it in a foreclosure. The other thing is, as the note investor, if you do wind up in the foreclosure scenario, one of the big risks is there's damage to the property. The inside is messed up because there's this big spread between the unpaid balance and the value. You've got more room to maneuver there. There's less chance. It's pretty difficult in this note to ultimately take a loss. What has to happen to take a loss is borrower's got to stop paying. You take it through foreclosure, and then you get it back, and you're like, oh my gosh, like the inside is just wrecked. The roof is bad. The foundation is cracked. It's a hoarder house. Who knows? And by the way, I've had all of those things happen, and I have gotten upside down on deals in that way, but not on ones that were quite this thick. Okay, so that's our deal when we buy the note, right? Like pretty solid return, lot of factor of safety involved. So that's a pretty sweet deal. So how do we make it a little better? So consider for a minute, instead of just holding that note for 195 months, we instead sell a partial. So we're going to sell some of the payments off to another investor. So here's our example. So on the left, this is just what I showed before when we're buying the note. On the right is when we sell the partial to the investor. Let's say we find an investor who's happy with an 8% return. So we sell them a number of payments for $100,000. They're going to get this net $1,215 payment. So our $1,250 minus the $35 servicing. And to get that 8% return in this case, we need to sell them exactly 120 payments. Okay. Now we've done kind of a cool thing here. We've actually taken all of our money, in this case, back out of the deal. Now, when you structure these, you don't have to structure them where you take all your money out of the deal, right? You could sell some payments and leave money in the deal. That's up to you. I'm not going to talk about in this webinar. You can get even fancier and do what's called a fractional. You can sell like partial payments, like so a partial number of payments and a partial amount of the payment. But here we're just selling 120 of the full payments, and that investor is getting an 88% return. We're getting our money back out of the deal. So let's put this in a more visual way, right? So we've pulled our money out, which is kind of sweet because this now allows us to go and do another one. We sold 120 payments. So these 120 payments are going to go to the investor, but then we're going to get payments 121 through 195. So these first 120 go to the investor. And then these last 75 would go to me and my girlfriend, Allison. Here, these are our Coach Prime shades. I live in Colorado. This was at the CU game versus Arizona a few weeks ago where they unfortunately lost. Now, what are my returns on this? So in reality, I bought this note for $100,000. There's some amount of time, right, to find the investor. If I want to get fancy, I could find the investor before I close and do like a double close. But assuming like we buy the note and then we find the investor, or there's some, time lag between when I fund and the investor buys the partial, let's say we're going to have that money in the deal for 0 to 2 months, something like that. And then we get the payments of $1,215 starting in 10 years. And so that return is actually a lot because we took our money out of the deal, or we had money in the deal for a very short period of time. So it's kind of a, theoretically close to infinite or very large return. But there's actually more that a little more we get into this. There's another good hidden thing. What happens if the borrower pays off the loan early? Either they sell the house and pay it off. Maybe they refinance it. Most of these notes you see are at higher interest rates. If the borrower pays it off, right, then they're paying off all 190 payments. So in that case, your partial borrower gets the money for their 120 payments, and you get your payments for those 75 at the back end, right? So in this case, oh, actually, I kind of did this wrong. Actually, I just realized I made an error here. If we had bought the note outright and the borrower paid it off early, we would have a $27,000 profit. Actually, in my case, because I did the partial, I'm making the $27,000 times 75 divided by 95. So someone can do that math. So maybe it's more like 12,000 or something like that. But the point still remains that if the borrower pays off early, we get some upside. So we get all that money back and some profit. So why would you do this rather than just buy the note and hold it? Well, number one, that I mentioned a couple times, you have the ability to pull your money back out of the deal, and now you can go and do more, right? You can keep going, or you can keep going, do more partials, or do the partial, cash your money out, and then go buy another note and hold it, or put it into some other investment, whatever. Second reason is this is a really great play in a retirement account, because especially if you have a, you know, the example I gave here was like a $100,000 deal, but there are ones that are, you know, $20,000 that you can do. It's really a good way to highly leverage a smaller balance IRA account as well, right? Because you can just keep doing these as you go. The thing that I find really powerful is you're building these future cash flows, right? So in my example, money shows up in 10 years. You can tailor these so that money shows up sooner. But if you're 48, but I'm 48 years old, let's say I want to retire early at 58, I could go out in 2024, do a whole bunch of these over the course of this year. And then if I want to retire in 10 years when I'm 58, then all of a sudden all these cash flows are going to show up. And so that's pretty sweet. And then the fourth reason why I just mentioned, you've got this potential for an early payoff as well. You're not necessarily having to wait all those years to recoup the money. So now what about the investor side for a minute? So this is the person that's buying the partial. Why would they do this? Well, I mean, the example I gave, I showed it at 8%. We could also, I've also created these at 10. They're getting a steady return, a flat return, and this is after fees, right? So my example included the servicing cost. If I wanted to be sneaky, I could say, well, okay, it's an 8% return based on the $1,250 payment. And then the investor would receive something less after they pay the servicing. But in this case, I actually rolled them in. So if you look at that like high single digit return that the investor can get, that's about the same or a little bit higher than the long run return with dividends in the stock market. It's generally better than the bond market, unless you're talking about some like super risky bond. So it's a pretty steady return, and it doesn't have the volatility of the stock market. So like one thing, when I started my investing career, actually back when I was 18, I was, you know, all in the stocks and options and things like that. And so having bought stocks through the .com bubble and the housing crisis and 07, 08-ish, it was interesting to me. And in COVID more recently, it's fascinating to me how the stock market can drop 25 to 30% in a relatively quick amount of time. I've seen it 3 times now in my relatively short investing career with a span of about 25 years or so. So I'm getting returns that in the long term are similar, and I'm taking out the volatility. So that's really, really valuable as an investor, especially if you're one that's in retirement or approaching retirement, where you're not necessarily wanting to take on as much volatility as someone who's maybe in their 20s. From the investor standpoint, it's pretty passive, right? It's pretty low effort. Someone else more experienced found the note, they found the seller, They negotiated with the seller. They did the due diligence. They closed the deal. They got the servicing set up and kind of handed it to me on a silver platter. So that's pretty sweet. This is also a way that people tend to start in note investing sometimes. So when people want to get started in note investing, I know from my own experience, buying the first note on your own is a fairly scary proposition. So buying a partial is can be an easier way to get into the note investing world, right? If I'm starting note investing by buying a partial, I'm outsourcing some of the work to somebody else, but I'm still reviewing a deal, I'm in a deal, I'm reviewing payments, working with the servicer. It can be a good entry point into that. And as I said before, it's really awesome for retirement accounts, especially as you're close to retirement, to reduce volatility or to really leverage a smaller balance account by allowing yourself to pull your money back out and then go and do more deals. Okay, now how do we set these things up? You're always going to want to have an attorney write up your agreement. Now, like anything else, there are several variables. There are different ways different note investors like to set these up. I'll talk about the way I personally set them up, but that's not the only way or necessarily even the best way. Okay, but that partial agreement will define who retains the servicing. If you go to FCI, they've got actually special programs for servicing partials, and it's one of the ways I recommend doing it. So if you use FCI's program, it's kind of nice because you board the loan with them, you give them the partial agreement, they set everything up, and they handle sending the first X number of payments to the partial buyer, and then they automatically switch it over to you when it's completed. I find that the most straightforward way to do. I've seen people set it up where the partial seller retains servicing and collects the payments from the servicer and then sends the money to the partial buyer. There's a few more moving parts there. You know, in that case, the partial buyer has somebody else in the loop that they need to trust to follow through on the agreement. But generally, I like to set it up where just FCI handles it, and then everything is automatic for everybody. Now, the big question that's always on everyone's mind when they hear about this is, okay, what the heck happens when the loan stops performing? Again, there are some different ways you can handle this. That needs to be specified in your loan agreement. The way that I like to set them up, if I'm selling the partial, then me as the seller, I'm on the hook for the workout to either take it through the foreclosure or work with the borrower to get it paying again. God forbid it should become non-performing. So for me, when it's kind of a service that I provide to the investor who's buying the partial, right? That's one of the other reasons they might accept that lower 8% return, right? One of the things they're getting for that is they've got an experienced note investor there ready to step in and handle things if the borrower should stop performing. However, in this case, we've underwritten it pretty well, right? Borrower's got a lot of equity, there's a lot of skin in the game. It's pretty unlikely that a loan like this would find its way to foreclosure. You can also set these up where the loan actually transfers back and basically the partial seller agrees to buy the loan back. I don't like to do that, but that's a way you could do it. Okay, so what are we looking for when we're trying to find notes that make good candidates for partials? Well, number one, obviously, is we want low risk, right? We don't want to get into that foreclosure scenario. We just want the borrower to make payments and have everything go easy peasy. You know, maybe the borrower sells the property or refinances and we get an early payoff. That's awesome. But we want to really look for stable performing loans, either loans that are well seasoned, or if it is newly, I mean, you can do this on a newly originated loan. You just want to make sure it's well underwritten, right? So the borrower's made a good down payment, borrower has equity, Dodd-Frank compliant, look at the borrower's credit, all of those kind of things. Yeah. Okay, so how do you go and find someone to buy your partial if you're going to buy a note and try to do this? My number one method is just through my network, and I maintain a pretty large email list. So when I have deals for investors, I send them out to that investor interest list, and generally tend to find someone pretty quickly. If you haven't built an email list, that's fine. There are several Facebook groups out there related to note investing that you can post in and probably find people. There are a bunch of LinkedIn groups. I haven't actually been active myself in the LinkedIn groups. Local meetups are a great way to do this, right? If you go to local, RIA, other meetup, there's usually people there with their eyes peeled looking for investments. The other way I highly recommend is going to conferences. So I just attended Note Expo in November last month. There's also DME. And then there are other IRA conferences. So there's the Quest Expo. Quest is a self-directed IRA company. They happen to be the one that I use for my self-directed IRA, where you can find a lot of investors there looking for deals. Okay, now I'm going to get into a little bit. So that's kind of what partials are. That's how partials work. But now I'm going to get into the part of the discussion that's like a little bit more philosophical. So I've been kind of thinking deeply on this subject over the last 4 months, and it gets into why I like partials so much, right? So what I'm doing when I sell a partial and I'm creating this cash flow that's going to show up 10 years in the future, 8 years in the future, whatever, that's what most people would call passive income, right? I do some work up front, nothing happens for 10 years, and then money shows up, hopefully. In reality, of course, nothing is passive, right? When I get those partial payments in 10 years, they didn't just fall from the sky. I had to do some work. The difference is you can shift the time when you do the work, right? So like I did this work to find the loan, to buy it, to sell the partial, and then I collected money later. Now, what's interesting as I studied this is there's some interesting things that happen when you shift the time gap between when you do some work and when you get paid for that work, right? So there's other things we can do where I do work today, I get paid essentially today, or I can do things like partials where I do some work now and I get paid way out in the future. So the work now, pay now example is like a W-2 salary or consulting gig or driving an Uber, something like that, right? Like that's the common way to work now, get paid now. If you want to work now and get paid later, that would be something like a partial, and there are other kinds of investments you could do. What is interesting to me is that if you look at our time preference, if my time preference is to get paid sooner, which is like the W-2 type model, I have much less leverage. I'm willing to stomach this longer time preference, like I'm going to get paid 10 years out in the future, 8 years out in the future. Then the work that I do, while I have to wait, that's the price I pay. What I get back for that is a whole lot of leverage on my money, and I'll illustrate what I mean by this. So this is the power of partials, right? So like in our example, we're getting these cash flows of $1,215. They're going to start 10 years from now. And let's say what stops me in 2024 from doing this 10 times, right? One of the cool things about notes, once you get your processes down, how to find them, how to fund them, how to do due diligence, how to filter, how to price them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, very rinse and repeat type business. So let's say I go out and do this 10 times. Well, now in 10 years, I'm going to have about 12,000 bucks a month start showing up, which is pretty nice. So me, age 48 today, let's say I go out, I do 10 of these over the course of 2024, that's not unreasonable at all. Well, in that case, I could retire at 58 and I'd be getting this 12K a month, right? So I'd be getting about 144K a year. Generally, when you retire, hopefully you've got other retirement savings to go with that, maybe you're at the point where you can collect Social Security, so that's maybe not your entire nest egg, right? But in a lot of parts of the country, the 144K, even on its own, is going to do you like pretty well. And if that's not enough for what you need, that's cool. You can just do more, right? You can do more than 10. You can do 20. Better yet, do 50. Maybe it takes a couple years to do all of those. But it's really a way to highly leverage some work now and create some really significant cash flows in the future. And I'll illustrate what I mean when I'm talking about this being a very high leverage activity. So in our example of finding this deal, let's say you spent 20 hours looking for deals, finding it, doing the due diligence, negotiating, getting the deal closed, finding the partial investor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's just an estimate. It's probably not going to take me that long. It might take some people longer, but I'd say this is a fairly conservative estimate, right? So if we look at those 75 payments we're now entitled to kind of free and clear, it's over $91,000. So if it takes me 20 hours to do this deal and I get $91,000 in the future, that's like $4,500 an hour, which is the highest leverage thing that I know how to do. I don't get paid that in my W-2. Yeah, I can't think of too many legal or even illegal ways to generate that. And yeah, okay, these cash flows are in the future based on whether inflation over that time is 3% or 4% or whatever. Yes, it's going to be less in present value terms, but whatever, even if it's half of that, it's still a super highly leveraged activity. When you consider that, 120K your job, assuming you're working 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, $60 an hour. So this is way higher leverage than anything you can do in many day jobs. So that's the power of partials. That's what I had for you today. I hope that gives you good kind of understanding, appreciation of how these things work, kind of how powerful they can be and what you can do with them if you're willing to play this really long-term game. So here's my contact information. I know somebody asked for it earlier in the chat. You can always reach out, send me an email at dan@fusionnotes.com, or my website's there. I've also got a podcast, the Note Investor Podcast. And if anyone wants these slides, you can drop me an email. I'm happy to send those out to you afterwards. So now I can open it up for some questions. So we got one here. Tracy asked, can you resell the partial after you buy it, or are you locked in? I've never had anyone do that. I believe the short answer is yes, assuming that you didn't create the partial agreement in such a way that like precluded that, right? But in general, you could do that. Shouldn't be a problem. And we'll see if we got any others. Someone asked, do you have any available? Not this minute, but I might in like a week or two. So just in the last week, I agreed to pricing with someone on a package of 11 notes, and I'm going through the due diligence process right now. Some of those might be good candidates for partials, but I can definitely let you know about that, or just drop me an email maybe after this to remind me so that I can check back in with you once I get through the due diligence on those. All right, cool. So if there's no further questions, I think I'll wrap it up there. Oh, wait, I think I'm missing some stuff. Sorry, I missed a bunch of questions. I was looking at the chat and I didn't notice the Q&A. So, okay, can we get a copy of the presentation? Yeah, if you drop me an email at dan@fusionnotes.com, I'll be happy to send you a copy of the slides tomorrow. And then, oh, Jake asked a good question. What's the difference between a partial and a hypothecated note? Maybe next time I'll do a webinar on hypothecated notes, but what a hypothecated loan is, and I hate that word, it's kind of a confusing word. The other thing you can do, which is kind of similar to a partial, but very different, is called hypothecating a loan. So that's when I go out, I buy a note, and instead of selling some of the payments like I'm doing here, I take a loan from an investor. And that loan is just collateralized by the note that I bought. So not really that different than other loans you might take from an investor, other than instead of being collateralized by a piece of property, it's collateralized by a loan, and then that loan is collateralized by a piece of property. So from the investor's point, from the person buying it, whether they're buying a partial or buying a hypothecated loan, not really any different, because they're getting a set payment every month for some period of time. So from that investor standpoint, it's kind of the same. From the standpoint of the operator, when I sell the partial, I'm creating a future cash flow. When I do the hypothecation, investors getting paid every month some smaller amount than the payment that's coming in, and I'm making a spread. So I'm making a monthly cash flow, but it tends to be a lot smaller. So from the operator standpoint with a hypothecated loan, I'm making a smaller monthly cash flow for a longer period of time. When I sell a partial, I'm getting no cash flow for a long time and then bigger cash flows later. It really depends on whether your goal is to try to generate cash flows in the short term, or if this is more of like a longer term or retirement play. How do I open the conversation to buy a partial from a note investor? Well, I mean, what you do is kind of like Tracy did, is just ask around. You can also do the same things that I mentioned if you're trying to sell a partial as buy. I would hit up the note investing Facebook groups, some of the LinkedIn groups, go to meetups. If you go to any of the note conferences like Note Expo, DME, some of the others, and you run around and ask if anybody's selling partials, like you'll find somebody selling partials pretty quick if you do that. Let's see here. Is selling the partial pretty much solely dependent on finding others who are open to accepting a lower return on their investment than you? Yes, and I'll explain why that's in their best interest. Does this come with your ability to buy in larger bulk and get better deals? Seems like it would be tough for the smaller investor buying one-offs. So part of the reason that investor will accept a lower return is, to your point, yeah, they don't have to do the sourcing, right? So they don't have to mess with going around and trying to find notes, trying to find sellers and doing the bidding. You're offloading that from them. The other thing you're doing for them is the due diligence and then actually getting the deal closed and all of that. So for the person looking to get started, or the person that just wants to be more passive, part of the reason in the delta returns is they're offloading a lot of the work to an operator who's doing it. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we got for now. So thanks everyone for attending, really appreciate it. Like I said, email me if you want the slides, or if there are other topics you want me to cover in the future that we haven't done yet, just give me a holler and please let me know. But thanks for tuning in, appreciate it.